What if I told you that one of the smallest civilizations in ancient history left behind one of the greatest legacies of all time? And what if I told you that the world's alphabets, the lifeblood of writing itself, were born not in Egypt, Greece, or Rome, but from a forgotten band of sea traders who painted the ancient world in purple? Welcome to the story of Phoenicia, a civilization without a vast army, without sprawling empires, yet powerful enough to shape human communication forever. Picture the eastern Mediterranean nearly 3,000 years ago, a rugged coastline dotted with harbors, Tyre, Sidon, Byblos, cities glowing under the sun as ships glide in from distant lands. On board, cedarwood, glass, and a dye so rare it was worth more than gold. The air smells of salt and ambition. These are not warriors. These are merchants, explorers, innovators. And they are about to change everything. But behind their prosperity lies a mystery. Who were these elusive sea kings? How did they rise, thrive, and then vanish, leaving behind only symbols carved into clay that would one day become our alphabets? This is the entire history of Phoenicia. And it begins with the sea, the people who spoke to the sea. The story of Phoenicia begins not with conquest, but with coastline. Long before they became the masters of the Mediterranean, the Phoenicians were simply survivors, descendants of Canaanite peoples who learned to make a living where land and water kissed endlessly. Their homeland was narrow, hemmed in by mountains on one side and the sea on the other. Crops were scarce, empires loomed nearby, and yet this harsh geography became their teacher. When others built walls, the Phoenicians built ships. The cities of Byblos, Sidon, and Tyre became their holy trinity of trade. Byblos was ancient even to the ancients. Its name gave us the word Bible. Here the people dealt in papyrus from Egypt, their hands stained with ink and ambition. Sidon, further south, grew rich on glass and purple dye. And then there was Tyre, the island fortress that would become the beating heart of Phoenician power. So proud and defiant that even Alexander the Great, centuries later, had to build a causeway just to conquer it. But in the beginning there were no kings or empires. There were only merchants, families who passed down the art of navigation like sacred scripture. They learned to read the stars, to understand the winds, and to trust the sea more than any ruler. The Phoenicians saw opportunity where others saw danger. They turned the treacherous Mediterranean into a highway of fortune. Their ships, slender, swift, and sturdy, were unlike anything the world had seen. Made from the famous Lebanese cedar, their hulls could brave storms and travel farther than the Egyptian barges or the Mycenaean galleys. Soon their vessels dotted the horizon from Cyprus to Crete, from Carthage to Cadiz. The sea became their empire, its currents their roads, its islands their milestones. Imagine standing on the docks of Tyre at dawn. The air hums with shouts of sailors, the creak of ropes, the perfume of exotic goods. Ivory tusks from Africa, silver from Spain, incense from Arabia. Every voyage returned with treasures, stories, and something even greater, knowledge. The Phoenicians were not just traders of goods, they were traders of ideas. Through them, the myths, mathematics, and artistry of countless civilizations blended together, flowing like tides from one shore to another. And yet, their most valuable export wasn't something you could touch. It was something that lived in words. In their bustling markets, countless tongues clashed, Egyptian, Babylonian, Greek, and more. The Phoenicians needed a simple way to record trade agreements and shipments. Cuneiform was too complex, hieroglyphs too sacred. So they did something revolutionary. They simplified writing itself. Around 1050 BCE, the first phonetic alphabet was born, 22 symbols, each representing a sound. No pictures, no gods, no hidden meanings. Just sounds you could combine endlessly to form words. It was as if the world had suddenly learned to speak in a new way. The Phoenicians had given humanity a tool to capture thought itself. But invention does not guarantee immortality. The same sea that brought them riches would one day bring them ruin. Across the waves, new powers were rising, Assyrians in the east, Greeks in the west. The Phoenicians' mastery of trade made them invaluable, but also vulnerable. The empires that came after would exploit their skill and envy their wealth. Still, for a time, they were unstoppable. They founded colonies across the Mediterranean, the most famous being Carthage, which would later grow into an empire of its own, one that dared to challenge Rome itself. But that is a story for another chapter. For now, imagine them at their height, a people without borders, whose homeland was the horizon. They sailed not for conquest, but for connection.
Their ships carried the seeds of civilization itself.
Their words the foundation of language. And somewhere, on a distant shore, a Phoenician scribe dipped his reed into ink, marking a line on papyrus that would echo across millennia. The world would one day forget their names, but never their legacy, because every time you write, speak, or read these words, you are, in some small way, speaking the language of Phoenicia. Purple blood and golden seas. Have you ever wondered how a single color could shape the fate of civilizations? How something so simple, just a shade of purple, could become the symbol of power, luxury, and divine right for thousands of years. The Phoenicians didn't just sell goods, they sold status, and their secret was the color of kings. The story begins along the rocky shores of Sidon and Tyre, where the waves crash against hidden coves and fishermen bring in nets heavy with strange, spiny shells. Inside these shells, called murex snails, lay a substance so rare, so precious, it would redefine wealth itself. When crushed and left to rot under the Mediterranean sun, these unassuming sea creatures produced a liquid of an otherworldly hue, a deep, shimmering violet that refused to fade. The Phoenicians discovered that this pigment could dye fabric in a color unlike any other, Tyrian purple. It glowed even in the dimmest light, as if born from the sea and fire together. To produce a single gram of this dye required thousands of snails and weeks of painstaking labor. So expensive was this process that only the world's most powerful rulers, pharaohs, emperors, and kings, could afford to wear it. In an age when color spoke louder than crowns, purple became the language of royalty. Tyre became the beating heart of this new industry. Its streets perfumed by the strange, fishy scent of murex dye vats. Visitors to the city wrote of the overwhelming stench that clung to everything. But for the Phoenicians, that smell was the scent of fortune. Their ships carried purple-dyed cloth to every shore, Egypt, Greece, Assyria, even as far as the western Mediterranean. The demand was endless. Tyrian merchants became legends, their wealth growing beyond comprehension. But the story of Tyrian purple isn't just about commerce, it's about identity. This color became the soul of Phoenicia. Even the name Phoenician may come from the Greek phoenix, meaning purple. They were the people of the purple, the red men of the sea, their fame shimmering across empires. And yet, the Phoenicians never relied on dye alone. Their genius lay in diversification. They were artisans of glass, craftsmen of jewelry, and architects of trade routes that stitched together the known world. They traded cedarwood, so prized in Egypt that pharaohs offered gold for it, alongside fine linen, ivory, spices, and silver. They were the unseen hands behind other empires' luxuries. Imagine the port of Tyre at dusk, hundreds of ships returning from across the Mediterranean, their sails tinted with salt and sun. The docks overflow with goods and stories. A sailor from Cyprus boasts of strange gods worshipped under mountain temples. Another from Carthage brings tales of a new colony growing strong in the west. The Phoenician harbors weren't just centers of trade, they were crossroads of culture. Languages, ideas, and inventions mingled freely here. And amid it all, the city's wealth gleamed, bronze gates, marble courtyards, and purple banners fluttering proudly against the wind. But wealth, as always, invites envy. To the north and east, the Assyrian Empire was rising, a force of iron and ambition. The Assyrians saw in Phoenicia a treasure trove to be claimed. Tyre and Sidon, rich yet defenseless, became targets. The Assyrians didn't want to destroy them. They wanted to control them, to turn the flow of purple and gold toward their own coffers, and so began centuries of uneasy submission. The Phoenicians paid heavy tribute but retained their autonomy, so long as their ships kept sailing and their goods kept flowing. It was a delicate dance between freedom and survival, between pride and pragmatism. Even under the shadow of empires, the Phoenicians thrived. When Assyria fell, they adapted to the Babylonians. When Babylon gave way to Persia, they served the Persian kings with fleets that conquered Greece. Like the tides, they changed with the world around them, never resisting the current, but mastering it. And through it all the purple flowed. One story tells of a Phoenician dog who, after biting into a murex shell on the beach, stained his muzzle deep purple. His owner, a nymph named Tyros, adored the color, and thus the city of Tyre claimed the discovery as its divine gift. Myth or not, the tale captures the essence of the Phoenicians themselves. Chance meeting genius, turning the mundane into the magnificent. But there's a darker side to this splendor. Beneath the wealth and beauty, the Phoenician cities were trapped in a fragile balance. They were small, divided, and constantly threatened by larger powers. While their ships ruled the waves, their lands were narrow and easily besieged. The sea gave them life, but also their only escape. It was this dependence on the sea that would soon drive them to explore farther than anyone before. When the pressure from empires grew too great, they looked west, not for conquest, but for freedom. Their sails carried them beyond the known world, past Egypt and Greece, to new lands where no rival could reach them. There, on distant shores, they would plant colonies that would outlive even Phoenicia itself. Among them, one would rise higher than all others. A city destined to inherit the Phoenician soul and carry it into legend. Her name was Carthage, and her story would echo across centuries of war and wonder. But before we sail west with the pioneers of Carthage, take a moment to imagine this. The Mediterranean at night, scattered with the lights of Phoenician ships. On every vessel, sailors whisper prayers to Melkart, god of the sea and protector of Tyre. Their eyes fix on the stars, their minds on the horizon. They don't yet know that their journey will give birth to one of the greatest rivalries in history. They are not just traders now. They are torchbearers of an idea. An idea written not in stone but in symbols, trade routes, and stories. An idea that the sea belongs to those brave enough to trust it. And so, under a sky of endless stars, the Phoenicians set sail toward destiny. Their purple sails fade into the darkness, but their legacy, oh, that never fades, because beyond the horizon lies the next chapter of their story. A chapter of courage, colonization, and empire. Carthage, the daughter of Tyre. Have you ever heard of a city born from exile, raised on ambition, and destined to challenge the might of Rome itself? A city that began as a single spark of Phoenician courage and grew into a flame that nearly consumed the ancient world. That city was Carthage, the proud daughter of Tyre. Our story begins with a queen and a tragedy. Her name was Elissa, though history would remember her by another name, Dido. She was a princess of Tyre, sister to King Pygmalion, who ruled with greed as deep as the sea. When her husband, perhaps the only man she ever trusted, was murdered by her own brother for his fortune, Elissa fled her homeland. She gathered her followers, loaded her ships with treasures, and set sail into the unknown. The winds carried her west, far from the shores of Phoenicia, far from the reach of kings and killers. Weeks passed. Her fleet braved storms, hunger, and fear. Yet, on the edge of the known world, she found a new coast, a place the locals called Kart Hadasht, meaning new city. And there, on the sunlit shores of North Africa, Dido and her people began again. Carthage was born not from conquest but from survival, from the spirit of a people who refused to vanish. At first it was small, a settlement of traders and exiles, their purple sails fluttering against the wind. But like Tyre before it, Carthage's power grew with the tide. Its harbor, carved into a perfect crescent, became a masterpiece of engineering, a circular inner dock for the navy, a rectangular outer port for merchants. From this hub, Carthaginian ships set sail across the western Mediterranean, linking Spain, Sardinia, and Sicily in a golden triangle of trade. The same Phoenician genius for commerce now pulsed through Carthage's veins. Their ships carried silver from Iberia, tin from Britain, and spices from Africa. But they were no longer just middlemen. Carthage became a creator of empire. The city's craftsmen built mighty fleets and invented new forms of ship design. Their captains braved the Atlantic, sailing as far as modern-day Morocco, and, some say, even beyond the Pillars of Hercules, into the unknown ocean that lay west of the world. In every sense, Carthage was Phoenicia reborn, wealthy, daring, and deeply connected to the sea. Yet something had changed. The Carthaginians were no longer merely traders. They had become defenders. Their homeland was vast now, surrounded by rival powers. In the west, tribes of Berbers. In the east, Greek colonies. And across the sea, rising like a storm cloud, the first shadow of their greatest enemy, Rome. But before Rome came knocking, Carthage faced a different kind of challenge, survival in a world that saw them as foreigners. The Greeks called them Punics, a corruption of Phoenicoi, meaning the purple people. Their language, their gods, even their rituals carried echoes of old Tyre. They worshipped Baal Hammon, lord of the sky and fertility, and Tanit, his divine consort, a goddess of the moon and stars. Their temples blazed with offerings, and their priests guarded traditions that stretched back to the dawn of civilization. Yet to outsiders, their ways seemed alien. Stories spread of dark rituals, of sacrifices made to the gods during desperate times. Whether truth or propaganda, such tales would haunt Carthage for centuries. But inside the city, life thrived. The streets of Carthage rang with the sound of markets and laughter. Ships arrived daily carrying silks, metals, and grain. The great merchants of Carthage became legends, families whose fortunes spanned continents. Unlike the monarchies of old Phoenicia, Carthage developed a republican system of government. 2 elected magistrates, known as suffetes, ruled alongside a council of elders and a powerful senate. In this balance of commerce and politics, Carthage found its rhythm, and under that rhythm, the city's heart beat in gold. But history has a cruel way of testing greatness. Across the sea, Rome was growing, not as a rival yet, but as an inevitable force. At first, the 2 powers coexisted peacefully. Carthage even helped Rome in its early wars, supplying ships and trade. But the Mediterranean is a small world, and 2 giants cannot share the same sea forever. Their clash was not yet upon them, but the signs were there. Carthage's colonies in Sicily began to brush against Greek settlements. Tensions brewed, alliances shifted, and slowly, the stage was being set for one of history's most legendary rivalries. Still, in these early years, Carthage's spirit burned bright. The city sent explorers to chart the edges of the world. One of them, a man named Hanno the Navigator, recorded an astonishing journey down the coast of Africa. His fleet encountered islands teeming with strange animals, possibly even gorillas, and peoples whose customs were unlike anything known to the Mediterranean world. His voyage became a testament to Carthaginian courage and curiosity, proof that they had inherited the fearless heart of their Phoenician ancestors. But Carthage's success came with a heavy cost. Its wealth attracted not only envy, but dependence. While the city grew rich, the people of its territories grew restless. Carthage's rule was efficient, but not always kind. Colonies were taxed heavily, and its armies relied on mercenaries, soldiers for hire from distant lands. This would one day prove to be Carthage's greatest weakness. For now, though, Carthage stood unchallenged, a jewel of the Mediterranean, the queen of trade, the empire of the sea. From the markets of Iberia to the temples of Tyre, her influence spread like ripples on water. The Phoenician spirit had not died, it had evolved. And yet, deep in the heart of every Carthaginian, a question lingered like a whisper from the east. Would the daughter of Tyre share her mother's fate? Because history, like the sea, has no mercy for those who forget its tides. Soon, the horizon would darken. The drums of war would echo across the Mediterranean, and Carthage, the proud creation of Dido, would find itself staring into the eyes of a rival it could neither buy nor outlast. The Romans were coming, and when they met, the world would tremble. The Punic Wars, when empires collide. Have you ever witnessed 2 worlds collide, one born from trade and cunning, the other from discipline and steel? When Carthage, the daughter of Tyre, faced Rome, the rising wolf of Italy, it wasn't just a clash of armies. It was a clash of philosophies, one ruled by wealth and the sea, the other by law and the sword. And when these two titans met, the Mediterranean itself became their battlefield. It began quietly, as such storms often do. Around 264 BCE, in the island of Sicily, a conflict broke out between small local powers. Rome, fresh from uniting Italy under its banner, stepped in to restore order. Carthage, already present in Sicily for generations, saw this as an intrusion into its territory. Both claimed to protect their allies. Neither intended to back down. Thus began the First Punic War, a 23-year struggle that would redefine the ancient world. At first, Rome had no navy. Its soldiers were masters of land warfare, but the sea belonged to Carthage. The Punic ships were unmatched, sleek, fast, deadly. Rome seemed doomed to fight an enemy it couldn't even reach. But then, in true Roman fashion, they did something audacious. They copied. They captured a Carthaginian warship, studied it, and within months, built a fleet of over 100 ships. To compensate for their inexperience at sea, the Romans invented a brutal innovation, the corvus, or crow. It was a boarding bridge with a spike at the end. When a Roman ship rammed its enemy, the corvus dropped down, locking the two vessels together, turning sea battles into land battles, something the disciplined Roman legions excelled at. The tide began to turn. After years of bloodshed, storms and shattered fleets, Carthage sued for peace. The Romans demanded Sicily, and Carthage paid heavily for the loss. But the peace was bitter. In Carthage's heart, anger smoldered like an ember waiting for wind, and the wind came. Carthage rebuilt its fortunes, turning its eyes to Spain. There, under the brilliant General Hamilcar Barca, the Carthaginians founded new colonies, mined silver, and trained new armies. Hamilcar's young son Hannibal watched and learned. From his father, he inherited not just skill, but hatred. Before the boy was 10, Hamilcar made him swear a sacred oath, never to be a friend of Rome. It was an oath that would echo through history. When Hamilcar died, Hannibal rose. Charismatic, cunning, and utterly fearless, he took command in Spain and soon provoked Rome once more by attacking the city of Saguntum, a Roman ally. Rome demanded his surrender. Carthage refused, and thus began the Second Punic War, the most famous of all. What followed would become legend. In 218 BCE, Hannibal did the unthinkable. Instead of sailing to Italy, he marched with an army of 50,000 men, 9,000 cavalry, and 37 elephants. His route took him through Gaul, across icy rivers, and over the towering Alps, a feat no one thought possible. The journey was hell. Men froze. Elephants slipped on cliffs. Thousands perished. But against all odds, Hannibal emerged on the other side, descending into Italy like a phantom from the mountains. Rome had never seen anything like it. At Trebia, Hannibal lured the Romans into icy waters and crushed them. At Lake Trasimene, he ambushed an entire Roman army in the mist, slaughtering tens of thousands. And then came Cannae, the battle that would haunt Roman generals for generations. At Cannae, Hannibal's forces were outnumbered nearly 2-1. But his strategy was a masterpiece. He placed his weakest troops in the center, drawing the Romans in, while his cavalry and elite soldiers curved around them like a closing fist. When the dust settled, over 50,000 Romans lay dead, an entire army annihilated in a single day. Rome trembled. Cities defected. Allies wavered. Hannibal seemed unstoppable, yet at the very height of his triumph, something unexpected happened. He hesitated. Instead of marching on Rome, he waited, hoping for reinforcements from Carthage that never came. Politics, distance, and jealousy at home doomed him. Meanwhile, Rome adapted. They refused to fight Hannibal head-on. Instead, they adopted the Fabian strategy, named after General Fabius Maximus: harass, delay, deny battle. They turned their attention overseas, attacking Carthage's holdings in Spain and North Africa. Enter Scipio Africanus, a young Roman commander whose brilliance would rival Hannibal's. Scipio studied his enemy, learned from his tactics, and struck where Carthage was weakest. In 202 BCE, at the Battle of Zama, the two greatest generals of the ancient world finally met face to face. It was destiny versus destiny. Hannibal's elephants charged, but Scipio's lines parted. The beasts passed harmlessly through. Then came the Roman legions, disciplined and unyielding. When the dust cleared, Carthage was defeated. Hannibal fled into exile, his dream of destroying Rome shattered, but not his legacy. Carthage's punishment was brutal. They lost their empire, their navy, and their pride. They were forbidden from waging war without Rome's permission. Yet against all odds, the city rose again, not through conquest, but through commerce. The Carthaginians rebuilt, their harbors once again filled with ships. For a time, peace returned. But peace never lasts in the shadow of empire. A century later, Roman senators, led by the infamous Cato the Elder, ended every speech with the same words, Carthago delenda est. Carthage must be destroyed. Rome could not tolerate the sight of its old rival thriving again, and so came the Third Punic War, a tragedy more than a battle. In 149 BCE, Rome besieged Carthage. The city, though stripped of power, refused to surrender. For 3 long years, the Carthaginians fought like lions, men, women, and children defending every street, every wall. When the Romans finally broke through, they found a city of ashes and defiance. The destruction was total. Carthage was burned to the ground. Its survivors were sold into slavery. And though the famous tale that the Romans sowed the land with salt is likely myth, the truth is even more haunting. Carthage was erased from the map, but legends can't be buried so easily. In time, even Rome rebuilt the ruins as a Roman city. Yet beneath every marble arch and Latin inscription lay the ghost of Tyre's daughter, a civilization that had once ruled the seas and given the world its words. Carthage had fallen, but the Phoenician spirit lived on, in the alphabets of Greece and Rome, in the trade routes that still shaped nations, and in the human drive to explore beyond the horizon. The sea that once belonged to the Phoenicians would one day belong to the world. But their story doesn't end with destruction. For what they built, language, exploration, and the courage to connect distant worlds, would outlast even the mightiest empires. And from the ashes of Carthage rises our final question. If the Phoenicians gave us the alphabet, the foundation of civilization itself, what does it truly mean that we've forgotten their names? The alphabet and the immortal legacy of Phoenicia. Have you ever wondered how every word you speak, every letter you write, is a whisper from the ancient world? That the very alphabet you're using right now was born not in the temples of Egypt, nor in the academies of Greece, but in the hands of sailors and merchants who once ruled the sea. This final chapter is not about war or conquest. It's about something far more powerful, an idea that outlived every empire. The story of the Phoenician alphabet begins in the bustling markets of Byblos and Tyre, amid the noise of traders and sailors shouting across the docks. One problem haunted the Phoenician merchants: how to record everything they bought and sold. The old systems, Egyptian hieroglyphs, Mesopotamian cuneiform, were beautiful, yes, but slow, complex, and reserved for priests and scribes. A merchant didn't have time to carve hundreds of symbols into clay or papyrus just to track a shipment of cedar wood. The Phoenicians, practical as ever, sought simplicity. They looked at the world, at the way language flowed through their lips, sound by sound, not picture by picture. And then, like a spark in the dark, the idea came. What if each sound could be represented by a single symbol? And so, around 1050 BCE, the first true alphabet was born. 22 simple characters, each standing for a sound: Aleph, Beth, Gimel, Daleth. These weren't words or images. They were phonetic symbols, easy to learn, easy to write, and easy to adapt. Anyone could use them, not just scribes or kings, but sailors, merchants, and wanderers. The alphabet democratized communication. It gave ordinary people the power to record, trade, remember, and imagine. From the harbors of Phoenicia, this gift spread like wildfire. To the north, the Greeks encountered Phoenician traders and adopted their script, adding vowels to suit their tongue. The Aleph became Alpha, the Beth became Beta. Together, they gave us the word alphabet. The Greeks passed it to the Etruscans, who passed it to the Romans, who shaped it into the Latin alphabet, the one you are reading right now. Every English word, every French poem, every Spanish song, all trace their roots to those 22 Phoenician letters scratched on papyrus in the dawn of history. It is hard to comprehend the magnitude of this legacy. The Phoenicians, a people without an empire, conquered the future not with swords, but with symbols. Their ships carried not armies, but alphabets. And while their cities fell to dust, their words became immortal. But the alphabet was only part of their gift. They taught the world to think in terms of connection. Where others saw borders, the Phoenicians saw roots. Their world was one of exchange, of goods, of cultures, of stories. They were the first to make the Mediterranean a shared space, a network of trade and ideas. In a way, they created the ancient version of globalization. Through their journeys, they became storytellers, weaving the myths of distant lands together. Some scholars believe that Greek legends, like that of Europa, the princess carried away by Zeus, were inspired by Phoenician tales. The name Europa itself comes from a Phoenician word meaning land of the setting, sun. Even the Greek myths of sea gods and wandering heroes may have drawn from the memories of Phoenician sailors who braved the unknown, and so, even in myth, their fingerprints remain. Yet the strangest part of their story is how they vanished. There was no grand collapse, no apocalyptic destruction, just a fading. The Phoenicians were absorbed into larger empires, Assyrian, Babylonian, Persian, Greek, Roman. Their cities continued, their people adapted, but their name dissolved like salt into water. Perhaps that was their destiny. For while empires carved their glory in stone, the Phoenicians carved theirs in air, in words that crossed oceans. They didn't need monuments. Every time a child learned to write, every time a story was told in letters, the spirit of Phoenicia lived again, and if you listen closely, you can still hear it. Imagine it now, the coast of Lebanon, where the ancient cities once stood. The sea glitters under the same sun that shone on Tyre and Sidon. The waves whisper against the rocks, telling the same eternal story, a story of people who trusted the sea, who built their future not on land but on water, and whose legacy flows through every written word on earth. They were not kings. They were not conquerors. They were connectors, bridges between worlds, and their greatest invention, the alphabet, became humanity's bridge to time itself. Think about it. Without them, there would be no Homer, no Plato, no Bible, no Shakespeare. The very fabric of culture, literature, and civilization depends on a system of writing invented by traders who simply wanted to keep track of their cargo. It's humbling, isn't it? The Phoenicians remind us that true power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it sails quietly across the sea, hidden in the ink of a scribe or the melody of a name. Their story teaches us that greatness is not measured by the lands you conquer, but by the ideas you leave behind. And that's why, though their empire is gone, Phoenicia never truly died. It lives in every language that flows from your lips, in every alphabet that shapes your thoughts, in every message written, every poem composed, every story told. The sea took their bodies, but their words, those survived the tide. So the next time you write your name, remember, you are touching a lineage that stretches back 3,000 years. A lineage of sailors, traders, dreamers, people who believed that the world could be connected through symbols. That is the eternal legacy of the Phoenicians, the people who gave humanity a voice.